When 6 movers showed up at dawn, my daughter-in-law, Jessica, stood on the porch with her arms crossed and declared, "This is my property now, old man. Time for you to leave." I was standing in my own front yard, surrounded by my belongings she'd thrown out like garbage, while neighbors watched through their curtains. For 3 years, I'd sacrificed everything for my son Brett's happiness. I'd given them my life savings, co-signed their mortgage, paid for their renovations, all because I believed family comes first. But watching Jessica smirk as she treated me like a tenant in the house I'd built with my own hands, I just smiled. Because what she didn't know about ownership laws was about to change everything. You see, there's a difference between helping family and being taken advantage of, and I'd finally learned which one this was. Hi, I'm Ryan Hughes, a 68-year-old retired mechanic who thought he was securing his son's future but ended up fighting for his own dignity. But before I tell you exactly what happened, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Have you ever dealt with someone who thought they owned something that wasn't theirs? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about when quiet people finally fight back. What she didn't know could fill the courthouse. My story starts 40 years ago when I first broke ground on 1247 Oak Street. Every board, every nail, every drop of sweat in that foundation came from my own hands. Margaret and I saved for 7 years to buy that lot. And when our son Brett was born, I promised myself he'd grow up in a house built by love, not just lumber. Margaret was the heart of our home. She made those walls feel warm with her Sunday roasts and the way she'd hum while folding laundry. When the cancer took her 5 years ago, I thought the house might feel empty forever. But Brett was there, helping me through the grief, and I knew Margaret would want me to take care of our boy. Brett had always been a good kid. Not the brightest in school, but hardworking. He got himself a job as a manager at Henderson's auto dealership after high school and worked his way up. When he turned 40 and still wasn't married, I worried he'd end up alone like me. Then Jessica Palmer walked into his life 3 years ago. She was a sales manager at some office downtown, confident and well-dressed. Brett was smitten from day one. She had this way of talking that made simple things sound important, and I could see why my son fell for her. I thought I was watching my boy finally find happiness. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to how she looked at our house during that first dinner. I built that house with my own hands. Margaret's last words to me weren't about love or forgiveness. She gripped my hand with what little strength the chemo had left her and whispered, "Promise me you'll take care of Brett. He's going to need you more than you think." I made that promise beside her hospital bed, and I meant every word. After we buried her in St. Mary's Cemetery, I threw myself into being the father Brett would need. I cooked his favorite meals when he visited, helped him with his taxes, listened to him talk about work troubles. When he started dating Jessica seriously, I made sure to include her in everything. The first time Brett brought up buying a house, I was ready. "Dad, we found this perfect place on Maple Street, but the down payment..." He didn't have to finish. I pulled out Margaret's life insurance policy statement, $85,000, everything we'd saved for retirement, for emergencies, for peace of mind. "Take it," I told him. "Your mother would want you to have a home." But that house on Maple Street fell through. The inspection revealed foundation problems, and Brett was devastated. That's when Jessica suggested something that seemed logical at the time. "Why don't we just fix up your dad's place?" she said over dinner one night. "It's got good bones, and we could all live together, like a real family." Brett's eyes lit up. "Dad, what do you think? We could renovate, modernize everything, make it perfect for all of us." Every decision seemed right at the time. Jessica Palmer was everything I thought Brett needed. She was organized where he was scattered, ambitious where he was content, confident where he was unsure. At 38, she'd never been married, which she explained as being too focused on career to settle for less than perfect. Their wedding was small but elegant. I paid for most of it, including Jessica's dress and the reception at the country club. She cried during the ceremony and thanked me for accepting her into the family like a real daughter. I felt proud watching Brett beam as they exchanged vows. The first few months of married life seemed smooth. Jessica organized Brett's schedule, helped him dress better, encouraged him to ask for a promotion at work. She had ideas for improving the house that made sense. New carpet in the living room, fresh paint in the bedrooms, updated fixtures in the bathroom. But I started noticing small things. The way she'd rearrange Margaret's knickknacks without asking. How she'd refer to our house when talking to friends on the phone. The subtle corrections when I'd mention something about my kitchen or my backyard. "It's so nice finally having a real family home," she'd say to her sister during Sunday calls. "Brett deserves a place he can really call his own." I told myself it was natural for a new wife to want to make her mark. Margaret had done the same thing when we first moved in, adding her own touches to make the space feel like ours. I should have listened to my gut. When Brett came to me about the mortgage, his credit score wasn't quite strong enough for the loan they wanted. The bank required a cosigner with better financial history. At 68, I had 40 years of steady employment, a paid-off house, and enough savings to make any lender comfortable. "It's just paperwork, Dad," Brett explained as we sat at my kitchen table with loan documents spread between us. "We'll make all the payments. Your name is just there as backup." I signed where they told me to sign. The lawyer mentioned something about ownership rights and original deed holders, but Jessica was eager to get moving, and I didn't want to slow down their dreams with legal technicalities. The $85,000 from Margaret's life insurance went toward their down payment. I watched my wife's final gift disappear into someone else's future, but seeing Brett's happiness made it worthwhile. At least that's what I told myself. Jessica was thrilled. "Ryan, you're making our dreams possible," she said, hugging me tight after the closing. "We'll pay you back every penny, I promise." But the payback never came. Instead, there were always other priorities. Brett needed new clothes for work. Jessica's car needed repairs. They wanted to take a honeymoon they couldn't afford during the wedding. "Don't worry about the money right now," I told them. "Your family." Jessica's smile was radiant. "You're the best father-in-law anyone could ask for." The lawyer mentioned something about ownership rights. 6 months later, Jessica decided the kitchen needed updating. "These appliances are from the 80s, Ryan. It's embarrassing when we have company over." She had magazines spread across the dining table, pages marked with renovations that cost more than I'd made in some entire years. "The countertops alone are going to run about $15,000, she explained, pointing to granite samples, "but it'll add so much value to the house." Brett looked uncomfortable. "Maybe we should start smaller, less expensive." "This is an investment," Jessica cut him off. "Besides, your father wants us to have a nice home, don't you, Ryan?" What was I supposed to say? That I couldn't afford to turn my kitchen into a showroom? That my retirement savings were dwindling faster than I'd planned? Instead, I pulled out my checkbook and wrote $35,000 to Premier Home Renovations. The workers arrived the following Monday. Jessica directed them like a general commanding troops, making decisions about my house without asking my opinion. When I suggested keeping Margaret's old spice rack, Jessica wrinkled her nose. "Those old wooden things collect grease and bacteria. Everything needs to be fresh and clean." I watched 40 years of memories get thrown into a dumpster, while Jessica picked out cabinet hardware that cost more per handle than I used to spend on groceries for a month. "This is my house now," I heard her tell the contractor when he asked about electrical modifications. "Do whatever I say." I started noticing the my and mine language. The kitchen renovation took 6 weeks. During that time, Jessica made it clear she was in charge of her home. She chose the paint colors, approved the tile work, and signed off on every change without consulting me once. When the work was finished, she called a family meeting at the dining table I'd built with my own hands 30 years earlier. "Ryan, we need to talk about living arrangements," she began, her tone businesslike. "This house isn't really big enough for 3 adults. Brett and I need our privacy as a married couple." Brett shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. "Well, you're retired now. You don't really need to be tied down to one place. Maybe it's time to find something more suitable for a single person. A nice apartment, maybe one of those senior living communities." The air in the room felt thick. "This is my house, Jessica. She smiled, that patient smile people use with confused elderly relatives. Technically, yes, but we're the ones paying the mortgage. We're the ones maintaining it. We've invested so much in improvements. It really makes more sense for this to be our primary residence. Dad, Brett finally spoke. Maybe she has a point. You could travel, see the country, not worry about yard work. I stared at my son, the boy I'd raised in this house, watching him agree with his wife that I should leave my own home. That's when I made the first call to my lawyer. Robert Chambers had handled Margaret's will and our estate planning for 15 years. When I called him that evening, his voice was warm and familiar. "Ryan, good to hear from you. How are things going with the kids?" "That's what I need to talk about, Bob. Can you see me tomorrow?" His office on Main Street still smelled like old leather and fresh coffee. Bob was 10 years younger than me, but had the kind of steady presence that made you trust him with important things. "Tell me what's on your mind," he said, settling behind his desk. I explained the situation, the co-signing, the renovations, Jessica's assumption that she owned my house. Bob listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "Let me ask you something important, Ryan. When you co-signed that mortgage, did you ever sign a quitclaim deed? Did you transfer ownership of the property to Brett and Jessica?" "I don't think so. I signed a lot of papers at closing, but nobody mentioned changing ownership." Bob opened his filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "Let me check our records." He flipped through documents for several minutes, then looked up with a slight smile. "Ryan, you still own that house. Your name is on the original deed from 1987. Brett and Jessica are listed on the mortgage, but that doesn't transfer property ownership. Legally, they're living in your house with your permission." The weight of those words settled over me like a warm blanket. I decided to wait and see how far this would go. 2 weeks later, I came home from grocery shopping to find my bedroom rearranged. Jessica had moved Margaret's jewelry box to the closet and replaced our wedding photo on the nightstand with a decorative vase. "I hope you don't mind," she said when I discovered the changes. I was doing some deep cleaning and thought the room could use freshening up. Those old things made the space feel so dated. Those old things included the quilt Margaret had sewn by hand and the wooden cross her father had carved for our wedding gift. Everything that connected me to my wife had been boxed up and stored away like forgotten junk. "Where's Margaret's jewelry box?" I asked. "Safe in the closet. But honestly, Ryan, you might want to consider donating some of these items. Holding on to the past isn't healthy." And that evening at dinner, Jessica announced she'd invited her sister and brother-in-law over for Saturday night. "I'm making my famous lasagna. It'll be so nice to entertain in a properly decorated home." When Saturday came, I helped set up chairs and arrange flowers. As guests arrived, Jessica introduced me as Brett's father who lives with us. The phrase hit me wrong, but I didn't say anything. During dinner, her brother-in-law asked about the house renovations. "Oh, we've put so much work into this place," Jessica beamed. "New kitchen, fresh paint throughout. It's finally starting to feel like whoa." She touched Margaret's memory box. The dinner party was where I first saw Jessica's true colors on public display. She'd invited Brett's co-workers from the dealership, including his boss, Mr. Henderson. I wore my best slacks and the dress shirt Margaret had bought me for Christmas 2 years before she died. Jessica, however, had different ideas about appropriate attire. "Ryan, you might want to change into something more current," she suggested as guests arrived. "That shirt is a bit old-fashioned for tonight's crowd." I looked down at my clothes. Everything was clean, pressed, and perfectly respectable. "This shirt is fine," I panted. She lowered her voice, but didn't bother hiding her words from the guests. "He's from a different generation, you know. Sometimes the older folks don't quite understand modern social expectations." Mr. Henderson shifted uncomfortably. Brett pretended to be busy arranging appetizers. During dinner conversation, Jessica shared stories about updating the house to reflect current tastes and helping Ryan adjust to changing times. Every anecdote made me sound like a confused old man who needed guidance to function in the modern world. "It's so challenging when older family members resist change," she told Mrs. Henderson, "but we're patient. Brett and I understand that Ryan's generation did things differently." I watched my son's face throughout the evening. He never contradicted his wife, never defended his father. I saw Brett's face, ashamed of his own father. The rent demand came on a Tuesday morning in March. Jessica sat across from me at the breakfast table with a typed letter and a calculator. Ryan, we need to discuss your financial contribution to this household. The letter was formal, like something from a business office. It outlined monthly expenses for utilities, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance, then calculated my fair share at $800 per month. $800? I read the number twice to make sure I understood. It's very reasonable for room and board, Jessica explained. If you were renting a one-bedroom apartment anywhere in this area, you'd pay at least that much. And here you get home-cooked meals and family companionship. I pay the property taxes on this house, I reminded her. I paid for the kitchen renovation. I assigned your mortgage. Jessica's smile was patient and condescending. That was very generous, and we appreciate everything you've done in the past. But ongoing expenses need ongoing contributions. I won't support a freeloader anymore. The word freeloader hit like a physical blow. This is my house, Jessica. She laughed, actually laughed, as if I'd told a joke. Not anymore, Ryan. We're the ones maintaining it, improving it, making the payments. Legal technicalities aside, this is our home now, and we need you to start acting accordingly. I realized she truly believed she owned everything. I waited for Brett to come home from work before bringing up Jessica's rent demand. Surely my son would see the ridiculousness of charging his father to live in his own house. Dad, we need to talk, Brett said, settling into the recliner I'd bought when he was in high school. Jessica told me about the conversation this morning. Did she tell you she wants me to pay rent to live in my own house? Brett sighed like I was being difficult. Dad, look at it from our perspective. We're trying to build a life together. We've invested everything we have in this place. The mortgage, the renovations, the upkeep, it's all coming out of our pockets. I gave you $85,000 for the down payment. And we're grateful for that. But Dad, that was 3 years ago. Since then, we've been carrying all the financial responsibility. Jessica works hard to keep this place nice, and honestly, $800 a month is pretty reasonable. I stared at my son, searching his face for any sign of the boy who used to help me in the garage, who'd sit on my shoulders during baseball games, who'd cried when his mother died. Are you seriously asking me to pay rent to live in the house I own? Dad, maybe it's time to think about whether this arrangement is working for any of us. You could find a nice apartment, have your own space, not deal with family dynamics. My own son chose her over blood. The property tax bill arrived the first week of April, addressed to Ryan Hughes at 1247 Oak Street. It always had been, every year for 40 years. I was sitting at the kitchen table opening mail when Jessica walked in from work. She glanced at the envelope in my hands and frowned. Why is that still coming in your name? I thought we were supposed to update all the paperwork after the mortgage. The tax bill comes to the property owner, I explained. Jessica set down her purse with force. This is exactly the kind of confusion that causes problems. We need to get this fixed immediately. I'll call the county office tomorrow. You can call anyone you want, but they're going to tell you the same thing. The tax bill follows the deed. Her voice rose with frustration. Then we need to transfer the deed. This mixed-up paperwork makes everything complicated when we're trying to manage our finances. Our finances? Yes, our finances. Brett and I are married. This is our house. These should be our tax bills, our insurance policies, our utility accounts. Having everything scattered under different names is inefficient. I looked at the woman, demanding I sign over my house to make her bookkeeping easier. I'll think about it, I said. Jessica's eyes narrowed. Think about it? Ryan, this isn't a favor we're asking. This is basic organization. If we're going to live together as a family, we need proper documentation. She had no idea she was demanding the impossible. The neighborhood barbecue was Jessica's idea. She'd been planning it for weeks, sending invitations to all the families on Oak Street and promising the best ribs this side of Kansas City. What she really wanted was to show off her perfectly renovated kitchen and newly landscaped backyard. This will be so good for Brett's career, she explained while addressing invitations. Mr. Henderson will see what kind of home we've built together. It might even help with that promotion. Saturday morning, she transformed the backyard into something from a magazine. String lights between the trees, cloth tablecloths on folding tables, flower arrangements that must have cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. "Ryan, I need you to handle the grilling," Jessica instructed. "You're good with mechanical things, and I want to focus on hosting." I fired up the gas grill I'd bought 10 years earlier and started cooking burgers and hot dogs for 30 neighbors. Jessica flitted between guests, accepting compliments on her beautiful home and her wonderful entertaining skills. "We've put so much love into this place," I heard her tell Mrs. Patterson from next door. "It's finally exactly what we wanted it to be." When people asked about the renovations, Jessica took full credit. "We completely updated the kitchen and bathrooms. It was so much work, but totally worth it." I could feel the storm coming. I'd been grilling for 2 hours when I needed to get more propane from the garage. My hands were greasy from handling the grill, and I'd been working up a sweat in the afternoon heat. When I came back carrying the tank, Jessica was standing with a group of her work friends near the patio door. "Ryan," she called out loudly enough for everyone to hear, "you smell like motor oil and charcoal. Could you please shower before touching anything in the house?" The conversation around us stopped. 20 neighbors turned to look at the sweaty old man being scolded by his daughter-in-law. I felt heat rise in my cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "I'm just bringing propane to the grill," I said. "I understand, but we have guests here. Presentation matters when we're entertaining." Her work friends exchanged glances. The Hendersons, who'd known me for 15 years, looked embarrassed for me. Even the newer neighbors seemed uncomfortable with the public correction. "Maybe you could use the basement entrance?" Jessica suggested with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That way you won't track anything through our clean kitchen." Our clean kitchen. In front of the entire neighborhood, she was treating me like hired help in my own home. The conversation stopped. Everyone stared, but Jessica wasn't finished. As I stood there with grease on my hands and sweat on my shirt, she decided to drive the humiliation deeper. "Honestly, Ryan, you dress like a homeless person sometimes," she said with a laugh that was meant to sound playful, but came out cruel. "No wonder Brett gets embarrassed when clients come to the house." The words hit the air like a slap. Mrs. Patterson actually gasped. Mr. Henderson looked down at his shoes. The couple from 2 houses down suddenly became very interested in their potato salad. "These old work clothes might have been fine in your generation," Jessica continued, warming to her audience, "but we're trying to maintain certain standards here. This is our house now, and we need everyone to act accordingly." Brett chose that moment to walk out of the house carrying a tray of condiments. He saw the circle of neighbors, saw me standing there red-faced with a propane tank in my hands, saw his wife holding court with her criticism. "What's going on?" he asked. Just explaining to your father about appropriate presentation when we have company," Jessica replied smoothly. "You understand how important image is for your career." I waited for Brett to defend me, to tell his wife she'd crossed a line, to show even a shred of loyalty to the man who'd raised him. Instead, he nodded slowly and said, "Dad, maybe she has a point." I saw pity in their eyes. For me. My son's words fell across the patio like stones into still water. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding reasons to refill their drinks or check on children who didn't need checking on. "I mean," Brett continued, his voice getting stronger as Jessica nodded encouragingly, "maybe it would be good to, dress up a little when we have company over. This is kind of a professional networking thing." Jessica beamed at her husband like he'd just passed an important test. "Exactly. We're trying to build connections in the community. First impressions matter." I stood there holding that propane tank, watching my 42-year-old son choose his wife's social ambitions over his father's dignity. In front of the Hendersons, who'd watched Brett learn to ride his bike in the same backyard. In front of the Pattersons, who'd brought casseroles when Margaret was sick. In front of people who'd known our family for decades. "Maybe Dad could just be more mindful next time," Brett added weakly. The silence stretched until someone's phone buzzed and provided an excuse for the group to break apart. People wandered away with mumbled excuses about checking the dessert table or using the bathroom. Jessica smiled triumphantly and followed her work friends toward the house. Brett trailed behind. not meeting my eyes. I was left standing alone in my own backyard, surrounded by the garden I'd planted and the fence I'd built, feeling like a stranger at my own party. My son threw me under the bus in front of everyone. The party wound down as the sun set behind the oak trees I'd planted when Brett was in elementary school. Neighbors made polite excuses and headed home with paper plates of leftover food and awkward smiles. The last guests were cleaning up their chairs when Jessica found me putting away the grill tools. "Ryan, we need to have a serious conversation," she announced in front of the remaining neighbors. "Tonight has made some things very clear." The Hendersons paused their loading of folding chairs into their car. Mrs. Patterson slowed her walk toward the gate. "This house belongs to people who understand how to maintain it properly," Jessica continued, her voice carrying across the yard. "People who can afford to keep it nice, who know how to behave appropriately when we're entertaining." "What exactly are you saying?" I asked. "I'm saying it's time you found your own place, somewhere more suitable for someone in your situation. We've been patient, we've been generous, but freeloading has to have limits." The word hit the evening air like a gunshot. Mrs. Patterson stopped walking entirely. Mr. Henderson turned around to stare. "You've been freeloading long enough, Ryan. It's time for the adults to take proper responsibility for this property." I set down the grill brush and looked at my daughter-in-law, really looked at her perfectly styled hair and her designer outfit, and her satisfied smile as she publicly evicted me from my own home. I went straight to my filing cabinet. Inside the house, guests were saying their goodbyes and complimenting Jessica on her beautiful home and wonderful hospitality. I walked past the social chatter and went to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. Margaret's jewelry box sat on the closet shelf where Jessica had banished it. I pulled it down and opened the little drawer where my wife had kept our important papers. Underneath her birth certificate and social security card was the original property deed, signed and notarized 40 years ago. "Ryan Michael Hughes," the document read in official black ink. "Fee simple absolute." I'd looked up that phrase once when we'd first bought the house. It meant complete ownership, with all rights and privileges. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding that piece of paper, and listening to Jessica accept praise for renovations I'd paid for in a house I'd built with my own hands. Through the bedroom wall, I could hear her laugh at someone's joke about getting the old-fashioned father-in-law trained properly. Margaret's wedding photo sat on the nightstand where I'd moved it back after Jessica's redecorating. My wife's gentle smile seemed to ask a question I'd been avoiding for months. What would you do if someone treated me this way? I picked up my phone and scrolled through contacts until I found Robert Chambers' number. He'd given me his personal cell for emergencies. "Bob, it's Ryan Hughes. I know it's Saturday evening, but I need to ask you something important." That night, I made 3 phone calls. "Ryan, are you all right?" Bob's voice was concerned. "You sound upset." "I need to know my legal options for getting someone out of my house." "Jessica and Brett?" "Yes." Bob was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure that's what you want to do? This is your family we're talking about." I told him about the rent demand, the public humiliation, Brett's betrayal in front of the neighbors. Bob listened without interrupting, making small sounds of understanding that told me he was taking notes. "Here's the situation legally," he finally said. "You never transferred ownership of the property. Brett and Jessica are essentially tenants with your permission to live there. If you want them out, you can terminate that permission." "How quickly?" "In our state, tenants without a lease can be evicted with 24 hours notice if they're living there by permission of the owner. Since there's no rental agreement, no lease, and no tenant protections, you have complete discretion." The words settled over me like cold water. 24 hours. What exactly would I need to do? You'd need to serve them with a written notice to quit the premises. If they don't leave voluntarily, you can file for immediate eviction with the sheriff's office. Given the circumstances, no lease, no payment of rent, your clear ownership, it's a straightforward process. And there's nothing they can do to stop it? Ryan, you own that house. You have every legal right to decide who lives there. The law was on my side. After I hung up with Bob, I spread every document across my kitchen table. The original deed from 1987, the mortgage papers from 3 years ago, the property tax bills all addressed to Ryan Hughes, the homeowner's insurance policy with my name as the primary policyholder. Jessica had been wrong about everything. She wasn't an owner. She wasn't even officially a tenant. She was a guest who'd forgotten her manners. I found the folder with renovation receipts. $35,000 for the kitchen, $15,000 for the roof repair, another $8,000 for bathroom updates and landscaping. Every check signed by Ryan Hughes, every invoice paid from my accounts. The mortgage papers told the story clearly. Brett and Jessica were borrowers, responsible for monthly payments. But borrowing money against a property doesn't transfer ownership. The house remained mine unless I'd explicitly signed it away, which I never had. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of Jessica throwing my belongings into the yard that morning. Screenshots of text messages where she'd referred to our house and our property. Photos of the changes she'd made without permission. In a legal battle, these would be evidence. But this wouldn't become a legal battle. This would become a simple eviction of unwelcome guests. I thought about Margaret, about what she'd want. She'd always been the peacemaker in our family, but she'd also been the one who taught Brett about respect and consequences. Actions have results, she used to tell him when he misbehaved as a child. Make sure you can live with yours. I had enough evidence to end this. At midnight, I sat in my recliner, looking at Margaret's photo and trying to imagine what my wife would tell me to do. She'd always seen the best in people, even when they disappointed her, but she'd also never tolerated disrespect in her own home. He's your son, I could almost hear her saying, but he's also a grown man who's made his choices. The choices were clear. Brett had chosen Jessica's version of their marriage over loyalty to his father. Jessica had chosen entitlement over gratitude. Together, they'd chosen to treat me like a problem to be solved rather than family to be honored. I thought about all the ways I could handle this. I could have another conversation with Brett, try to make him see reason. I could set boundaries with Jessica, demand respect without demanding departure. I could find my own apartment and leave them the house they seemed to think they deserved. But every option except one required me to accept being treated as less than an equal in my own home. Every option except one asked me to enable behavior that would only get worse with time. I'd spent 3 years being generous, being understanding, being patient. I'd given money, time, effort, and respect. In return, I'd received demands, insults, and public humiliation. Margaret would have understood that kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's just weakness dressed up as virtue. This wasn't about revenge. This was about self-respect. This was about teaching two adults that actions have consequences. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. I woke up before my alarm, made coffee in the kitchen I'd paid to renovate, and sat at the table where I'd fed Brett breakfast for 18 years. The house felt different in the pre-dawn quiet, like it was waiting for something to change. At 6 sharp, I called Allied Moving Company. I need immediate service. How quickly can you get a truck to 1247 Oak Street? Today's Sunday, sir. We're not usually... I'll pay double your standard rate for emergency service. This is a legal eviction situation. That got their attention. We can have a crew there by 8 a.m. Next call was to Peterson's lock service. I need all the locks changed on my house today. Every door, every window latch, everything. Sunday service runs extra. I don't care what it costs. The final call was to the county sheriff's office. I need to file a notice to quit premises for tenants without a lease. You can file that at the courthouse tomorrow, sir. This is an emergency situation. Is there any way to expedite the process? The deputy on duty explained that I could fill out preliminary paperwork over the phone and have an officer serve the notice that afternoon if needed. What's the urgency? He asked. The tenants are attempting to legally evict the property owner. I need to reestablish my legal residency before they dispose of more of my belongings. By 7 a.m., the wheels were in motion. The deputy who answered my call was sympathetic when I explained the situation. Sir, this happens more often than you'd think. Adult children and their spouses sometimes get confused about property rights. I provided all the necessary information over the phone, property address, names of occupants, my ownership documentation, the nature of their residency. The deputy confirmed what Bob had told me the night before. Since there's no lease agreement and they're living there by your permission, you can terminate that permission with 24 hours notice. If they refuse to leave after that period, we can enforce the eviction. What do I need to do? We'll prepare a notice to quit premises and serve it today. After 24 hours, if they haven't vacated, you can request immediate enforcement. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica had demanded that I leave immediately. Now the law would give her exactly what she'd tried to give me, 24 hours to pack up and find somewhere else to live. One more question, Deputy. If they've changed locks or denied me access to my own property, what are my options? Sir, you own that house. If anyone is preventing you from entering your own property, that's a criminal matter. We can assist with immediate access if needed. I signed the electronic documents from my kitchen table while Jessica and Brett slept upstairs in the master bedroom of my house. The deed spoke louder than any argument. At exactly 8 a.m., a moving truck rumbled down Oak Street and parked in front of my house. I'd been waiting on the front porch for 20 minutes, dressed in my best clothes and carrying a folder full of legal documents. Jessica appeared at the front door in her bathrobe, hair uncombed, squinting in the morning sun. "What's going on? What is that truck doing here?" "Moving truck," I replied calmly. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." "What are you talking about?" She stepped onto the porch, wrapping her robe tighter. "You can't just—" I handed her the notice to quit premises, officially served and legally binding. "This is an eviction notice. You're being ordered to leave my property." Jessica stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. Her face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and growing panic as she read the official language. "This can't be legal. Brett, get down here right now." The moving crew chief approached us with a clipboard. "Mr. Hughes, we're here to remove belongings from the property. Where would you like us to start?" "Everything that doesn't belong to me," I said clearly. "Clothes, personal items, anything they brought into this house after they moved in." Jessica's voice rose to a near shriek. "You cannot do this! This is my house!" I pulled out the original property deed and held it where she could see it. Her face went white as she read. Jessica grabbed the deed from my hands and read it 3 times before the truth began sinking in. Her lips moved silently as she traced the words, "Ryan Michael Hughes, and fee simple absolute." "This has to be old paperwork," she stammered. "We've been making mortgage payments. We renovated everything. You've been making mortgage payments on my house," I corrected. "You renovated my kitchen with my money. You've been living here because I allowed it." Brett came running down the stairs in his pajamas, taking the steps 2 at a time. "What the hell is happening? Why is there a moving truck outside?" Jessica thrust the deed at him. "Look at this. Your father still owns the house." Brett read the document, his face shifting from confusion to understanding to something approaching horror. "Dad, how is this possible? I thought when we got the mortgage—" "You got a mortgage. I co-signed it. But I never transferred ownership of the property. This is still my house, and you're both being evicted for violation of guest privileges." "Guest privileges?" Jessica's voice cracked. "We're not guests. We live here. We're married. This is our home." I looked at my daughter-in-law, really looked at her, standing on my porch in yesterday's makeup, holding legal proof that everything she'd believed for 3 years was wrong. "Prove it," I said simply. "Show me one document that gives you ownership rights to this property." She couldn't, and we both knew it. Brett was fully awake now, the legal reality hitting him like cold water. "Dad, you can't do this to us. We're family." "Are we?" I asked. "Because yesterday at the barbecue, you told 30 neighbors that I was an embarrassment who needed to learn proper behavior. I didn't mean— you meant every word. And your wife here has been planning to evict me for months. Well, congratulations. Someone's getting evicted today." Brett ran his hands through his hair, looking back and forth between the moving truck and the eviction notice. "This is insane. We've invested everything in this place. Our whole life is here. You invested in mortgage payments and renovations. You built a life in someone else's house. That was your choice." Jessica was reading the eviction notice again, searching for loopholes that didn't exist. There has to be something we can do, some legal recourse. You can't just throw us out with no warning. 24 hours is your warning. That's more notice than you gave me yesterday. Brett's voice turned pleading. Dad, please, let's talk about this like adults. We can work something out. Adults? I pulled the original deed from Jessica's trembling hands. Adults respect property rights. Adults don't try to evict homeowners from their own houses. I handed him the original deed. Brett held the deed like it might burst into flames. His hand shook as he read his father's name in official black ink, dated 40 years before his wife was even part of our lives. Why didn't you tell us? He whispered. Tell you what? That I owned the house I built with my own hands? I thought that was obvious. But the mortgage papers, the renovations, everything we've done, you asked me to co-sign a loan. I said yes. You asked me to help with improvements. I said yes. At no point did anyone ask me to sign over my property. Jessica stepped between us. This is all technicalities. We've been living here as your family. We've made this our home. You've been living here as my guests, I corrected. Guests who forgot their manners. Brett looked up from the deed with something like understanding in his eyes. We never asked, did we? We just assumed. For the first time in months, my son sounded like the boy I'd raised. We assumed this was ours because we wanted it to be ours. Wanting something doesn't make it yours, Brett. Paying for improvements doesn't transfer ownership. Contributing to expenses doesn't create ownership rights. Jessica's voice was getting shrill again. So what? You're just going to make us homeless? Your own son? I'm going to teach my son that respect isn't optional in family relationships. For the first time, Brett saw his mistake. I left Brett and Jessica on the porch, arguing with the moving crew, and went inside to pack my own suitcase. Everything I truly needed fit into one bag. A few changes of clothes, Margaret's jewelry box, and the folder containing 40 years of property documents. The house felt different as I walked through it one last time before the eviction. The kitchen Jessica had renovated looked sterile and unwelcoming. The living room she'd redecorated felt like a hotel lobby. All the warmth Margaret and I had built into these walls had been painted over and reorganized into something cold. From upstairs, I could hear Jessica on the phone with someone, probably her sister, explaining their crisis in increasingly frantic tones. Brett was in the garage loading tools into his pickup truck with mechanical precision. I stopped at the kitchen counter and pulled out my key ring. The house key I'd carried for 40 years felt heavy in my palm. I set it next to the coffee maker Jessica had bought to replace Margaret's old percolator. On a piece of paper, I wrote, "Locks will be changed at 6 p.m. Alternative arrangements are your responsibility. R. Hughes, property owner." I walked out the front door without looking back at the chaos on my lawn. The Allied moving truck was half full of furniture and boxes. Jessica was crying into her phone. Brett stood helplessly watching strangers pack up his life. I never felt more free. I drove to a diner downtown and ordered coffee while my phone buzzed with increasingly desperate calls from Brett and Jessica. I let them go to voicemail and listened to the progression of panic. First came Jessica's anger. "This is illegal! You can't just throw people out of their home! I'm calling my lawyer!" Then Brett's confusion. "Dad, please answer. We need to talk about this. There has to be a solution." Then Jessica's bargaining. "Ryan, let's be reasonable. We can discuss rent or a payment plan or something. You can't seriously mean to follow through with this." Finally, Jessica's desperation. "The lawyer says we have no legal standing. How's that possible? We've been living there for 3 years. We've put so much money into that place." I sipped my coffee and listened to a grown woman learn that wanting something very badly doesn't create legal rights to it. Her lawyer had apparently explained what Bob Chambers had told me. Without ownership documents or a lease agreement, she was just a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The final voicemail came from Brett, his voice hollow with understanding. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Jessica's sister is letting us stay with her until we can find an apartment. We can't afford a mortgage on our own. Not without your co-signing. Not without your help." The irony was perfect. They couldn't afford the house without the man they'd tried to evict. They couldn't qualify for a new mortgage without the co-signer they'd betrayed. They couldn't find comparable housing without the money they'd taken for granted. They couldn't afford the house without Ryan. Over the next 6 hours, my phone rang 37 times. I know because I counted. Each call was a masterclass in the stages of grief, compressed into real-time panic. Jessica's sister called first, trying to mediate. "Mr. Hughes, I'm sure we can work this out. Family disagreements shouldn't end up in court." "There's nothing to work out," I replied. "They have until 6 p.m. Brett's boss from the dealership called next. "Ryan, I don't know what's going on, but Brett's pretty upset. Says there's some kind of housing situation." Even Mrs. Patterson from next door tried to intervene. "Ryan, I saw the moving truck. Are you sure this is what Margaret would have wanted?" That question stopped me cold for a moment. Then I remembered Margaret's voice from her hospital bed. "Promise me you'll take care of Brett." She hadn't said enable Brett or let Brett walk all over you. She'd said take care of him. Sometimes taking care of someone means teaching them consequences. At 4 p.m., Jessica called personally, her voice raw from crying. "Ryan, please, I'm sorry about yesterday. I'm sorry about everything. We can start over. We can pay rent. We can sign a lease. Just please don't do this." "But where was this conversation when you were demanding that I pay you rent?" I asked. "I was wrong. I was completely wrong. I understand that now." "Do you understand why you were wrong?" Silence. "You were wrong because you forgot that ownership isn't negotiable. You were wrong because you confused my kindness for weakness. You were wrong because you treated my generosity like your birthright." Apologies only came when they needed something. At 6 p.m. sharp, I returned to Oak Street. The Allied moving truck was gone. The yard was clean. A small pile of belongings sat next to Brett's pickup truck. Things they couldn't fit in one vehicle. Things they'd have to leave behind. Peterson's lock service had completed their work while I was gone. Brand new deadbolts on every door, new window locks, a completely fresh set of keys that only I possessed. Jessica sat on the front steps crying while Brett loaded the last boxes into his truck. When they saw my car, both of them approached with desperate hope. "Dad," Brett began, we've packed everything. We're ready to go. But could we please talk about this? Could we work out some kind of arrangement?" "The arrangement is simple," I replied. "Find your own place. Build your own life. Learn to support yourselves without taking advantage of family." Jessica's tear-stained face was a study in disbelief. "You're really going to make us homeless? Your own son?" "You're not homeless. You're adults who need to find adult housing solutions, just like you demanded that I do yesterday." I walked to my front door and slid the new key into the new lock. It turned smoothly, and the door opened onto a house that was finally mine again. Behind me, I heard Brett's truck start up. I heard Jessica's sister's car pull up to help with the remaining boxes. I heard my neighbors watching from their windows as the woman who'd claimed ownership 24 hours earlier became someone else's house guest. The woman who claimed my house was homeless. The house was quieter than it had been in 3 years. I walked through rooms that felt familiar again, spaces where I could breathe without permission. The kitchen Jessica had renovated looked different when I wasn't a guest in it. I made dinner in my own kitchen and ate at my own table without anyone commenting on my table manners or suggesting improvements to my lifestyle. For the first time in months, I felt like I belonged in my own home. The neighbors' attitudes changed overnight. Where they'd seen a confused old man being managed by his daughter-in-law, they now saw a homeowner who'd reclaimed his property. Mrs. Patterson brought over a casserole and apologized for not speaking up during the barbecue incident. "We all knew something wasn't right," she admitted. "But family situations are so delicate." Mr. Henderson stopped by to ask about borrowing my hedge trimmer. "Always knew this was your place, Ryan. Glad to see you got it sorted out." Some people confuse kindness with weakness. 3 weeks later, Brett called. His voice was different, smaller, more humble than it had been in years. "Dad, I wanted to let you know we found an apartment. It's small, but it's what we can afford on our own." "Good for you." I also wanted to say, I understand now. What you did, why you did it. I waited. I never asked if I could live in your house. I never asked if Jessica could redecorate. I never asked if we could charge you rent. We just took. We took everything you gave us and decided it was ours. Yes, you did. Jessica's having a hard time adjusting. She's angry about the apartment, angry about having to start over. But I think maybe this is good for us. Learning to make it on our own. For the first time in months, my son sounded like a man instead of a boy. Respect has to be mutual, Brett. Family doesn't mean taking advantage. I know that now, Dad. I'm sorry it took losing everything to learn it. The deed was always my insurance policy. I keep the original deed in Margaret's jewelry box now, next to her wedding ring and the photo of us breaking ground on this house 40 years ago. Sometimes I take it out and read my name in that official black ink, remembering what ownership really means. It's not just about legal rights or property law. It's about dignity. It's about drawing lines that people can't cross without consequences. It's about understanding that kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's just enablement dressed up as love. Margaret would be proud, I think. Not of the eviction, but of the stand I finally took. She always taught Brett that actions have consequences. It just took him 42 years to learn that lesson. The house feels like home again. The kitchen still has Jessica's granite countertops, but now they're mine to enjoy or change as I see fit. The renovations I paid for serve their intended purpose, making my house more comfortable for me. Ownership isn't just legal, it's personal dignity. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And eviction notices don't lie.